The Xylaris descended through Earth's troposphere, the blue and green hues giving way to an unexpected landscape of barren, sun-scorched Earth. Inside the spacecraft, Commander Zarn, a tall figure with silver skin and luminous eyes, stood at the helm, peering intently at the readings. Zarn was known for his pragmatism and unwavering determination, qualities that had earned him the respect of his crew. Beside him, scientist Lyra, a curious and eager biologist, was almost bouncing with anticipation. Her fascination with Earth's unique ecosystems was palpable. She had spent countless hours studying Earth's flora and fauna, preparing for this very moment. In the corner, Engineer Xanter, a methodical and resourceful technician, monitored the ship's systems. Xanter's green scales glinted under the control panel lights as they adjusted various settings, ensuring everything was functioning optimally. The last member of the team, Navigator Varek, a lithe figure with a sharp, angular face, stared nervously at the navigation controls. A recent miscalculation had landed them in this desolate region instead of the lush environments they had intended to explore. As the ship touched down, the team could not conceal their disappointment. The dry, cracked ground stretched out endlessly, devoid of the vibrant life they had hoped to study. "This isn't what we expected," Lyra murmured, her voice tinged with a mix of confusion and intrigue. Commander Zarn, always quick to adapt, rallied the team. "We're explorers, after all. There is still much to learn from this environment. Let's set up base camp and start collecting data." The crew disembarked, their suits shielding them from the harsh climate. They set up a temporary base, the alien technology humming softly as it came to life. Despite the barren landscape, Lyra's enthusiasm was infectious. She began taking soil samples, her eyes widening at the unique mineral composition. "This place may look empty, but it's full of potential discoveries," she exclaimed, her voice brightening the oppressive silence of the desert. Xanter, meanwhile, set up the equipment necessary for maintaining their life support systems. The extreme heat was already pushing the limits of their technology. "The temperatures here are far beyond our initial estimates," Xanter noted, adjusting the cooling systems. "We'll need to monitor our equipment closely to prevent malfunctions." Varek, still feeling the weight of his error, busied himself with recalibrating the navigation systems. He was determined to redeem himself, even as guilt gnawed at him. As the day progressed, the team continued their exploration. The searing heat and desolation were a stark contrast to the vibrant life they had studied from afar. Lyra, undeterred, catalogued the sparse vegetation and hardy insect life, marveling at the adaptations that allowed them to survive in such a harsh climate. The sun blazed overhead, reflecting off the ground and making the air shimmer with heat. The team's spirits remained high, buoyed by the thrill of discovery and the camaraderie that bound them together. By evening, the temperature dropped sharply, and the team gathered in the base camp. The day had been long and challenging, but their initial disappointment had given way to a cautious optimism. "This might not be what we planned for," Zarn said, addressing his team, "but it's an opportunity to learn and adapt. We are here to explore, and that means embracing the unexpected." Lyra nodded, her eyes shining with the same excitement she had felt upon landing. "The ecosystems here are fascinating, even if they're not what we expected. There's so much we can learn about survival and adaptation in extreme environments." Xanter, ever the realist, added, "We need to be cautious. Our resources are limited, and the environment is harsher than we anticipated. We must ensure our equipment remains functional and our supplies last." Varek, though still subdued, spoke up, "I'll work on recalibrating our instruments and improving our scans. We might still find what we came here for, even if it's not in the form we expected." The team shared a moment of silent agreement, each contemplating the challenges ahead. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert. The sky, once a harsh, blinding blue, now softened to a deep indigo, speckled with stars. The Xylaris stood silent against the vastness of Death Valley, an alien vessel in an unforgiving landscape. As they settled in for the night, a sense of determination settled over them. They were explorers, after all, and their journey had only just begun. The barren land around them held secrets yet to be uncovered, and they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The first day of their mission ended not in despair, but with a renewed sense of purpose. They were not just studying a planet, they were pushing the boundaries of their understanding and endurance. The harshness of the environment was a test, and they intended to pass it. The second day dawned with the sun's harsh glare reflecting off the parched landscape, intensifying the already extreme temperatures. The Xylaris crew felt the oppressive heat more acutely than before. The initial wonder at the unique environment was overshadowed by the stark reality of their situation. The harsh conditions of Death Valley quickly turned from an interesting challenge to a relentless adversary. Engineer Xanter was the first to notice the effects on their equipment. The heat was causing their advanced technology to falter. Cooling systems were struggling to keep up, and the sensitive instruments used for data collection were starting to malfunction. Xanter, with a furrowed brow, worked tirelessly to maintain their gear, but the relentless heat was a formidable foe. "We're pushing these systems to their limits," Xanter muttered, frustration seeping into their usually calm demeanor. Despite their best efforts, Xanter knew that prolonged exposure to these conditions could spell disaster for their mission. Meanwhile, Lyra continued her exploration of the local wildlife, albeit with increasing caution. The creatures she encountered were fascinating in their adaptations to survive in such a harsh environment. However, not all encounters were benign. While examining a rocky outcrop, Lyra spotted a snake coiled in the shade. Fascinated, she leaned in closer, only to be bitten by the venomous creature. The team rushed to administer aid, but the venom acted swiftly. Despite their advanced medical technology, Lyra's condition worsened rapidly. Her death was a stark reminder of the dangers lurking in this seemingly barren land. Lyra's passing cast a pall over the team. The once bright and eager scientist, whose curiosity had driven much of their enthusiasm, was now gone. The loss had devastating effect Commander Zarn, who felt a deep responsibility for the well-being of his crew. He knew they needed to remain focused and find a way to survive, but Lyra's death was a harsh blow to their morale. "We must continue," Zarn urged, his voice firm but tinged with sorrow. "Lyra would have wanted us to learn from this, to keep pushing forward." As the days wore on, the team faced a new, pressing challenge: their decreasing supplies. The initial estimate of their food and water reserves had been based on the assumption of a more hospitable environment. The extreme heat caused them to consume more water than expected, and their food supplies were also running low. The crew's physical condition began to deteriorate, dehydration and hunger taking their toll. Varek, still burdened with guilt over the navigation error, took it upon himself to find additional resources. However, every attempt to locate water sources ended in failure. The dry, cracked earth offered no respite, and their spirits flagged under the unrelenting sun. The situation became increasingly desperate. The heat was merciless, sapping their strength and causing even the simplest tasks to become arduous. Xanter, usually methodical and composed, found it difficult to maintain the equipment in such conditions. The technology they relied on was not designed for this level of environmental stress, and despite Xanter's best efforts, systems continued to fail. "We need to conserve what energy and resources we have left," Xanter advised, though the words felt hollow. They all knew the situation was becoming untenable. Amidst the growing despair, the team also faced internal strife. The stress and fear brought by their situation led to frayed nerves and short tempers. Arguments erupted over the best course of action, with each crew member dealing with their grief and stress in different ways. Zarn struggled to keep the team unified, reminding them of their mission and the need to survive. Yet, even he felt the weight of their circumstances pressing down, the burden of leadership heavy on his shoulders. The environment, unforgiving as ever, threw more challenges their way. A sudden dust storm swept through, reducing visibility to near zero and adding another layer of difficulty to their already dire situation. During the chaos, Xanter was separated from the group. The team searched desperately, but the storm was relentless. When it finally subsided, they found Xanter collapsed, a victim of heatstroke and dehydration. Another life lost, another blow to the team's morale. Now, only Zarn and Varek remained. With their numbers reduced and their resources almost depleted, they made a desperate decision. They had to send a distress signal to their home planet, despite the damage to their communications equipment. Zarn, ever the leader, tried to maintain a calm facade, but the fear in his eyes was evident. Varek, driven by a need to atone for his earlier mistake, volunteered to venture out and find higher ground to boost the signal. "It's our best shot," he insisted, his voice resolute despite the tremble of exhaustion. As Varek set out, Zarn watched with a mix of hope and dread. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the vast emptiness of Death Valley stretched out before them. The landscape, once a source of curiosity, now felt like a hostile alien world. Varek's silhouette grew smaller in the distance, a lone figure against the harsh terrain. Zarn felt a deep sense of isolation, the weight of their losses pressing down on him. Varek struggled to reach the higher ground, each step a monumental effort against the oppressive heat and his own weakening body. Zarn, waiting anxiously, could only hope that Varek would succeed in sending a signal for help. The scorching sun rose once more over Death Valley, casting long shadows across the desolate landscape. The heat was relentless, oppressive, and unforgiving. For Commander Zarn and Navigator Varek, the situation had grown increasingly dire. Their physical and mental endurance was being pushed to the limit as they struggled to survive in this inhospitable environment. Varek had set out the previous day, determined to find a higher vantage point to send a distress signal. His guilt over the navigation error that had brought them to this barren wasteland weighed heavily on him. As he trudged through the arid terrain, every step felt like an immense effort. The harsh conditions had taken their toll, his body was weakened by dehydration and fatigue. Yet, Varek pressed on, driven by a desperate hope that his efforts would not be in vain. Back at the base camp, Zarn was left to confront the stark reality of their dwindling resources. The once vibrant and diverse team had been reduced to just the two of them. The death of Lyra and Xanter was a constant shadow, a reminder of the deadly nature of this alien world. Zarn felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, but he knew that dwelling on their losses would not help them survive. He focused on maintaining the equipment and monitoring the environment, hoping for any sign that Varek had succeeded. The oppressive heat was a relentless enemy, sapping their energy and morale. The water supply was critically low, and Zarn knew they had to ration every drop. The food reserves were also running out, and their physical condition was deteriorating. The situation was grim, and Zarn felt a growing sense of despair. Yet, he clung to a shred of hope that Varek's efforts would bear fruit and that help would come before it was too late. As the day wore on, Zarn struggled to maintain focus. The harsh conditions made it difficult to think clearly, and he felt a creeping sense of panic. He knew they couldn't last much longer in this environment, and the uncertainty of their fate was a constant gnawing anxiety. The once hopeful mission had turned into a desperate fight for survival, and Zarn felt the crushing weight of their situation. Meanwhile, Varek continued his arduous climb. The terrain was treacherous, the heat unbearable. His vision blurred, and his steps grew unsteady. He knew he was reaching his physical limits, but he couldn't give up. The thought of returning to Zarn empty-handed was unbearable. As he reached the top of a rocky outcrop, Varek paused to catch his breath. The air was thin, and the sun beat down mercilessly. He set up the communication device, his hands shaking from exhaustion. The equipment was barely functioning, the heat having taken its toll on the sensitive components. Varek took a deep breath and activated the device, sending out a distress signal into the void. For a moment, there was nothing but static. Then, a weak signal crackled through the device. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Varek's heart leaped with a glimmer of hope. He quickly transmitted a message, detailing their location and dire situation. The signal was faint, and he knew there was no guarantee it would reach their home planet. But it was their only chance, and he had to believe that someone would hear their plea for help. With the message sent, Varek felt his strength give out. He collapsed onto the rocky ground, the last reserves of his energy spent. As he lay there, the sky above him blurred, and he felt a strange calm settle over him. He had done everything he could, and now it was out of his hands. Varek closed his eyes, his thoughts drifting to his crewmates, the mission, and the home he might never see again. Back at the base camp, Zarn anxiously monitored the communication systems, waiting for any sign of response. Hours passed with no word from Varek, and Zarn's worry grew. The silence was suffocating, each passing minute stretching into an eternity. Zarn knew that Varek had faced incredible odds, and the thought of him alone out there was a constant torment. But there was nothing Zarn could do except wait and hope. As the day turned into night, Zarn felt a deepening sense of despair. The stars above were a stark reminder of the vast distance separating them from any hope of rescue. The barren landscape around him seemed to stretch on endlessly, a vast, uncaring expanse. Zarn knew that their chances of survival were slim, but he refused to give in to hopelessness. He had to believe that Varek's signal had been received and that help was on the way. The night brought a chilling cold, a stark contrast to the searing heat of the day. Zarn wrapped himself in his gear, the thin fabric offering little protection against the elements. He looked out into the darkness, his mind racing with thoughts of what might come. The silence was broken only by the distant sounds of nocturnal creatures, a reminder that even in this desolate place, life persisted. The fate of Varek remains uncertain. The night in Death Valley was cold, an ironic contrast to the blistering heat of the day. Zarn huddled inside the makeshift shelter, his eyes fixed on the communication device. The silence was a constant reminder of their isolation, each second stretching into an eternity. He glanced at the dwindling supplies, the water nearly gone, the food reduced to unpalatable rations. Varek's absence weighed heavily on him, a gnawing anxiety that refused to dissipate. Zarn knew that he had to make a decision. Staying put meant certain death, venturing out in search of Varek was a gamble, but it was their only chance. With a heavy heart, he decided to leave at dawn. The desert was a treacherous place, and he couldn't afford to waste time. He gathered what little supplies remained, securing them in a backpack. The night stretched on, each hour a test of his resolve. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Zarn set out. The landscape was a harsh, unforgiving expanse, the ground cracked and dry. He moved with purpose, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of Varek. The desert seemed endless, the silence oppressive. Zarn's thoughts drifted to their mission, the promise of discovery that had brought them here. It all seemed so distant now, overshadowed by the struggle for survival. Hours passed with no sign of Varek. The sun climbed higher, the heat once again becoming unbearable. Zarn's steps grew slower, each one a Herculean effort. He paused to take a sip of water, rationing the precious liquid. His throat was dry, his skin parched. The realization that he might never find Varek began to sink in, a cold dread settling in his stomach. Just as despair threatened to overtake him, Zarn spotted something in the distance. A figure, lying motionless on the ground. He quickened his pace, hope flaring briefly before the harsh reality set in. It was Varek, his body lifeless, a tragic testament to the harshness of this world. Zarn knelt beside him, his chest tightening with grief. The guilt and sorrow were overwhelming, they had come so far, only to meet such an ignoble end. Zarn knew he couldn't stay. He had to keep moving, had to find a way to survive. But as he stood to leave, a low growl stopped him in his tracks. He turned slowly, his eyes meeting the piercing gaze of a pack of coyotes. The animals were lean and hungry, drawn by the scent of death. Zarn's heart raced as the pack closed in, their eyes fixed on him with a predatory hunger. He reached for his weapon, but the coyotes were faster. They lunged, teeth bared. Zarn fought back with every ounce of strength he had left, but he was weakened, dehydrated, and exhausted. The struggle was brief and brutal. The pack overwhelmed him, their teeth sinking into his flesh. Pain seared through him, but it was the realization of his imminent death that hurt the most. As darkness closed in, Zarn's last thoughts were of his home, the mission, and the hope that had brought them here. With Zarn's death, the last hope of the alien team was extinguished. The coyotes, having fed, left the scene, leaving behind the broken body of the last explorer. The desert, vast and indifferent, resumed its silence. The sun continued its relentless march across the sky, casting long shadows over the barren landscape. The Xylaris sat abandoned in the desert, a silent sentinel in the vast emptiness of Death Valley. Its sleek design was a stark contrast to the rugged terrain, a reminder of the team's advanced technology and the hopes that had driven them to this distant world. The ship's systems, still functioning, continued to send out the distress signal that Varek had set up, though it was unlikely anyone would ever hear it. The mission had ended in tragedy, a grim reminder of the dangers of exploration and the harsh realities of the universe. As the days passed, the desert slowly reclaimed the site. The wind swept over the sand, erasing the footprints and signs of struggle. The bodies of the explorers were left to the elements, a stark testament to the unforgiving nature of this world. The Xylaris, with its doors sealed and systems running on reserve power, stood as the only marker of the alien team's presence. The fate of the Xylaris and its crew served as a cautionary tale, a reminder that the universe is vast and often indifferent to the struggles of those who seek to explore its mysteries. As the sun set on the final day, the desert returned to its quiet solitude. The stars shone brightly overhead, a silent witness to the tragic end of the mission. The Xylaris remained, a lone sentinel in the vast emptiness, a symbol of the team's hopes, dreams, and ultimate sacrifice. The story of their journey would remain untold, lost to the sands of time and the vastness of space, a silent testament to the dangers and wonders of the unknown.